The trade deadline in your league is about to hit in fantasy football, so here are the players you need to trade for as soon as possible before all of their values change and you can run away with a fantasy football championship. I do have a list of must buys and sells based on playoff schedule at the end as well, you do not want to miss, but I will not waste any of your time getting straight into it. The first guy that we need to get is Jaylen Warren, and I mean it with this guy. You look at his schedule. First of all, he is the number one best and easiest out of all running backs in fantasy football until he gets to the fantasy football playoffs. Then it gets a little bit tougher, but please go through and drop a like on this video. It helps me out a ton as a creator. It's free to you guys, just like the Bengals, Bears, Bills, Ravens, and Dolphins matchups that Jaylen Warren gets. It's absolutely insane. The only downside here is that, again, pretty tough ones in the fantasy football playoffs with the Lions and the Browns in the last 2 weeks. But considering the value that he's at right now, you can probably send a guy like DeAndre Swift, Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, or Marv to get him on your team, which I am doing 100% of the time. And I will give you a tip. It's always better to do 2-for-1 trades because you always want the best player in the deal. And if you're in smaller leagues, that is even more beneficial because you can just do 2-for-1 trades, pick a guy up off the waivers, and continue that process. And if you want more league winning tips like that, make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're new. But Warren does get usage in the receiving game as well, which makes him that much better of a fantasy running back. He's running a ton of routes. It makes him very, very safe. And even Mike Tomlin himself has literally said yesterday and a couple days before, they want to and will get him more touches going forward. If that's not enough to tell you to trade for him, I don't know what is. I'm believing coach. I'm believing this Bengals matchup that they do get. Trade for him hopefully before then because his value is probably going to skyrocket afterwards. But another running back that you need to trade for as soon as possible, and it is Woody Marks. You need to do this before this week's matchup because he's coming into this one against the Titans, who are top 3 in fantasy football points allowed to running backs this year. We just saw him get workhorse level usage in the week before. He saw 60 snaps to Nick Chubb's 10, 14 carries to his 5, and he got 27 routes to Nick Chubb's 5 routes. Now, that is really what's most important, and it led him to finish with 16 fantasy points because of it against a mid-Jaguars defense. It's not like it was the most positive matchup of all time, so he was given that, but it's not like it was a really, really hard defense either. It's still very impressive, but the route run total is really what's important for us here and why it's amazing because it shows us even when the Texans are down in games, which is probably going to happen a lot the rest of the season, he still will be used and he won't get game scripted out of the matchups. So you look at the game log for week 6 and on from what he's played, he's only had one bad game, and that was under 12 fantasy points against a very, very good NFL defense in the Broncos, possibly one of the best. So you guys know every single time I say you got to buy the rookies before their bye week because after the bye week, they get a jump in usage because teams get to finalize and conceptualize what kind of plan they want to have for the rest of the year with their players. I say this every time. This is exactly what I mean by that because his snaps and his usage has jumped since then, averaging over 10 carries per game. And now, yes, last week we did have Nick Chubb dealing with an injury, so he played a little bit less snaps because of that. But Woody Marks is clearly the more efficient running back. Nobody can deny that. And he has monster games coming up with the Tennessee Titans this week and a bunch of positive ones moving forward. The team is going to move forward with him if he dominates the Titans this week. And he has played them before. If you want to take a guess on how many fantasy points Woody Marks dropped on them earlier in week 4, it was 27.9 on only 57% of the snaps. So I think he's a must-buy. He is a must-buy. His value is insanely low right now simply just because of the name value. You can get him for guys like Khalil Shakir, Jake Ferguson, Tez Johnson even, or any 2-for-1 trades. Those are my favorite. You guys know that. But possibly my strongest buy high right now is going to be Jalen Waddle, who's quietly been a top 15 wide receiver, which honestly doesn't even feel real. I've drafted him every single year, and he's been absolute booty cheeks, and then the 1 year I don't draft him, he's top 15. Well, I'm trying to buy him now. He's the wide receiver 11, seeing 42% of this team's air yards. That is insane. 42%. Now, it makes sense when you look at the rest of this roster because who else do they have? It's Malik Washington and I guess really nobody else. I mean, the Dolphins here are disgusting to watch, and this is why his value is so low, but he's been averaging almost 8 targets per game and 90 yards over the last 3 matchups. They weren't all super positive matchups either. It is definitely a good sign. But now he's coming into the best matchup of the week against the Washington Commanders. I'm not wearing my Commanders shirt right now, but you guys know I'm a fan. Our defense cannot stop anybody. They are top 3 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, wide receivers, Running backs, every single position. This is a game where I would go through and start Tua, pick him up off the waiver wire if you need a guy. But we're also buying Jalen Waddle before it's too late for this exact reason. If you want more in-depth of a breakdown of that matchup in every single one, I went into it on an earlier video this week. So again, I'll pin it in the description below if you guys want to watch that. It's everybody's favorite every single week, so I would suggest you do it if you haven't. But Waddle has an amazing fantasy playoff schedule on top of everything else that's positive. He gets the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Buccaneers. All top 10 matchups in fantasy points allowed to the position. And it's really more positive for Tua because Jalen Waddle can be efficient, but it's all up to Tua, so he needs those good matchups, and he gets them. He had one of the hardest schedules to start the year. Now that completely flips upside down, and he does have his bye week coming still, so that's not a bad thing. You can just use that as a selling point to get him on your roster from your league mates. I would sell guys like Kyron Williams, Travis Etienne, George Pickens, somewhere around that range to get him on my roster, but everybody is throwing dirt on Zay Flowers' name to get to a point where he is a must-buy in this week. I mean, we've seen people trade Jameson Williams straight up. I'm taking Zay Flowers there 100 times over. The only problem with Flowers is that he's been extremely inconsistent, but this year, that's not really the case. He's had 3 different quarterbacks and still averaged 13.2 fantasy football points per game and only had 2 games under 10 points. But the good news here is that was all through insanely difficult matchups. To start the year, the Ravens wide receivers had the second hardest strength of schedule. That is insane. Now you flip that on the complete opposite from weeks 12 through 17. The Ravens have the number 2 easiest schedule, allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers per game. After this Browns matchup, it gets insane. He gets the Jets, who just lost Sauce Gardner. They lost Quentin Williams. They just let Jerry Jeudy be a top 10 wide receiver last week. Then after that, they get the Bengals, the Steelers, the Bengals again, the Patriots, and the Packers. It's a beautiful rest of season schedule. And the top fact here is that the Ravens need to generate offense and get this team moving to get to a playoff push, which is 100% possible, but they got to score and they got to do it quick. So you can expect this guy that's averaging a 29% team target share, which is top 10 in the league, to dominate the rest of the season. And Ricky Pearsall, 1,000,000,000%, is another guy that makes this buy low list. I've talked about him before. He's coming into this week's matchup against the Cardinals, which he is questionable to play. It's not a guarantee, but he is back at practice, and even if he doesn't play, he will be back soon. His value is in the dirt right now. I mean, you can get him for guys like Trey Tucker, Calvin Austin, Malik Washington, even Xavier Worthy. It's absolutely insane. Let's not forget that in his 3 fully healthy games to start the year, he averaged 8 targets per game, 94 yards, was the overall wide receiver 4 in air yard share, averaging 14.5 fantasy points per game. I know he's been injured for a long time. I know there's a negative connotation around him right now, but he's coming back into an offense that is 2nd in passing attempts, that is 10th in passing touchdowns, that is 1st in passing yards. Now, yes, a lot of that is going to Christian McCaffrey, but this is still a relatively efficient offense that he will be the wide receiver 1 inside of. He has to stay healthy. That's really the only thing, the only knock on his name. And there is a huge risk that he just doesn't. But when you look at his value, you have to trade bench players for him. Like, he's not going to hurt your team, and he's not going to be the reason you don't make your fantasy football playoffs. But on top of that, here's the rapid fire list of players that have great fantasy football playoff schedules that are also really good guys on top of that I would be buying right now, starting with Tyler Warren. I've had him in videos before, but his fantasy playoff schedule is one of the best in the league. He gets the Seahawks, which is a tough defense, but are actually top 10 in allowing fantasy points to tight ends. They just let that go and play defense everywhere else. The 49ers and the Jaguars, all top 10 matchups for him. The offense is rolling. He is an integral part of this team. Lamar Jackson as well. The Zay Flowers stack here. They get the Bengals, Patriots, and Packers in that fantasy playoff push. Lamar Jackson is an efficient running back and quarterback. So I like him in both of those aspects. Justin Jefferson as well. He gets the Cowboys, Giants, and Lions. I like Aaron Jones to be on top of this list as well. Very, very good matchups. JJ McCarthy has or will have a good amount of NFL experience by then. They can be a little bit safer there. I do like Trey Benson, another guy I've talked about in previous videos. He gets the Texans, Falcons, and Bengals in the fantasy playoffs. The Falcons look like a tough defense, but their run defense is very, very positive to running backs. He will come back. If he's on the waiver wire, you should pick him up for sure, but he will come back and be this team's relative RB1. You can get him for very low, just like Quinshon Judkins. He had a very difficult start to the year, one of the toughest fantasy playoff schedules. That completely changes, a lot easier for the rest of the season. He gets the Baltimore Ravens this week, which is a top 5 matchup. I would trade for him now if you can, but if you can't, it's okay. You can still send an offer. He gets the Bears, Bills, and Steelers to finish the year. But here's the rapid fire list of must sells, guys. If you have any of these players, or if your league mates are trying to sell them to you before the deadline, do not take Jake Ferguson. He has a very bad, I think the number one worst rest of season schedule in tight end points allowed to the position. And ever since CeeDee Lamb has come back into this matchup, his targets have dropped significantly. I would also look to sell Deebo Samuel with Terry presumably coming back eventually. Even if he doesn't, Marcus Mariota being in this offense definitely drops the efficiency. And you also look at his matchups, they're very negative. He has a bye coming. I'm looking to sell Juwan Jennings simply because Ricky Pearsall will be coming back. He is the wide receiver one, so Jennings' value will drop. If you have Kamani Vidal still, you should be selling him. If you have Jameson Williams, great game against the Commanders last week. It was a matchup dependent situation. I'm selling him again. If I can get him for Zay Flowers, I'm doing that. But that's going to finish out this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one coming tomorrow. All glory to the man above.